Electronic Arts CEO and suspected robot Andrew Wilson recently granted an interview to GameDaily.biz, his first in years, reportedly. In the interview, he talked about Anthem, he talked about BioWare, the future of the game industry, loot boxes, and subscriptions, and while I often encourage my viewers to go and read the source material, I cannot promise you a fascinating read. And it's certainly not the fault of the interviewer, it's just that Andrew Wilson speaks in such vapid corporate terms that he ends up not really talking like a normal person. He doesn't speak how people speak. In fact, a lot of what comes out of his mouth is shallow gibberish that seems designed to obfuscate way more than inform, which, in fairness to Android Wilson, is how a lot of executives speak. Nonetheless, he paints a future for the game industry that sounds very, very good to him, but may alarm regular viewers of this channel, especially when it comes to his talk of access over ownership. Andrew Wilson offers a fair bit of apologia for his company's frankly disgusting business models, and makes it quite clear that live services, these always online microtransaction-fueled, half-baked, rush-to-market trend chasers, you know, big piles of bullshit like Anthem, are here to stay. And they're here to stay because, according to Andrew Wilson, who provides no evidence to back it up, the game-buying public demand social interaction in their games. And that social interaction must of course be heavily monetized because of reasons. I'm often curious as to where these publishers get their information regarding what customers want. Because for years they keep telling us that we don't want linear games, we don't want story-driven games, there are certain genres that nobody buys, like strategy games or horror games, and yet when this shit comes out, it's successful? So are there actual studies saying that we all demand social interaction in our games? Or does this come from corporate focus groups? Which, by the way, are a terrible way to gauge customer demand because they're so bloody contrived, and a lot of what people say doesn't necessarily describe their practical spending habits. In any case, I'm kind of over millionaire and billionaire executives telling me what I like and don't like. Anyway, here's some nonsense from Wilson about live services and social interaction in games. Once you get to the point where social interaction is really, really important, then you discover that network effect in the context of games is as important as it is for Facebook, or Snapchat, or Twitter, or any of these other social grounds. Once you come to terms with that, what you understand is that people will come together to consume this content together, and they will want to stay and continue to consume that content and fuel those relationships as part of that. The reality is that is going to mean games as service is going to be foundational to our industry, because that is how you will fulfill the motivations of players who have social interaction at the very core of why many of them play games for much of the time they play. What? What was any of that? Must executives really talk like that? In this next quote, Android Wilson handwaves away the success of a number of single-player games that we've seen recently. And I'll be honest, and maybe it's just me being stupid, maybe I don't understand how a big corporate brain thinks, but what he says here comes across to me like complete, total babble. The way we built games 20 years ago actually doesn't fulfill what has become a very core motivation of why people play today. That's why games like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Spider-Man and Uncharted and these types of games will continue to exist, because yes, at the very core we want social interaction, and we see how digital media is a prime source for our social interaction today. But we still have these other motivations that we're trying to fulfill as players. The games as a service concept is likely to be foundational to our future because it fulfills the very core motivation of how we interact as human beings. That doesn't mean that has to be the case for every game, and it also doesn't mean that games that don't embody that at its very core can't be part of that broader network value that I have as a player. Cool, dude. So basically, he's saying that games are the way they are today because Twitter exists. And I don't know about you, but I have enough fucking social interaction from the internet Thank you very much. When I get off of this fucking computer and go to play a fucking video game, the last thing I want is more interaction with goddamn people on the internet. I've had enough by that point. I mean, obviously I'm being somewhat facetious and there are multiplayer games I do play, but I do call into question that there's this mass demand for so much social interaction in our games. I'm not saying there's no place for it, but Andrew's justifications feel like a weak excuse to prop up what is the real motivation for these live services, which of course is the monetization. And I call into question the need for so many live service games with so much social interaction, coming at the expense of other types of gameplay experiences. The market is healthier when there's more stuff to buy, more varied stuff to buy, more appeal to a more diverse audience. We're starting to see with live services what we've seen with every single trend in the game industry as part of this boom and bust cycle that propels it. There's only room for a few success stories at the top and a shed load of failures underneath them. We saw this with MMOs, we saw this with music games, we saw this with a lot of first-person shooters last generation. I don't pick up what Wilson's putting down. I don't believe the industry needs this many live service games, this many social interaction experiences, the sheer volume of vast open worlds full of fucking nothing. I don't see the need for the ubiquity of it all. As I discussed on this week's Jimquisition, subscription services look set to play a very big role in the next generation of systems, a concept that Android Wilson is completely in favour of because, well, of course he is. With the advent of subscription-based models, with the advent of cloud gaming, the final nail in the coffin of game ownership may very well be hammered in these next few years. And that's something the industry's wanted for decades at this point. They don't want you thinking that you own the things you buy. That gives you a sense of power as a customer, and we can't have that. Wilson, of course, doesn't admit that. He just hits out with yet more complete bollocks. The notion that our behaviour as players wouldn't change at the advent of a fundamental cloud disruption, what has been a demonstrated human behaviour orientation move from ownership to access and the rise of subscriptions, and the best business model to fulfill that, the notion that wouldn't happen in our industry, I think, is naive, and I say that humbly. I think it's naive. And the thing is, once you cut away the complete nonsense spilling out of his mouth, there is some truth to what he's saying there. He's basically saying that, very much like we've seen with Netflix and Amazon Video and all of that, once you offer easy access to streaming content or subscribed content, people are pretty likely to jump on board. And yeah, I think that is true. I've said myself, I'm interested in the concept of a Netflix for games. I just don't trust that concept in the hands of Electronic fucking Arts. Once they get to determine who owns the video game, once they get to determine where and when games are available, how much they are, when they get to completely control this market, the history of many mainstream game publishers suggests that they will take some excessive fucking liberties when it comes to making money off people. For evidence of this, just look back on the last million years of video games. I mean, just look how far EA pushed loot boxes in Star Wars Battlefront 2. That's the prime example. You want to trust those fuckers with your entire game library, with determining exactly how we play games in future? I certainly don't want to bloody trust them with that. And speaking of loot boxes, Android Wilson had plenty to say about those as well. Interestingly, not once in this interview does he refer to them as surprise mechanics, despite EA's VP of Legal Kerry Hopkins recently saying that's what Electronic Arts calls them. That said, I am amused that he takes no ownership over the term loot boxes, even as he says it. Whether it's direct purchase or this mystery box style that's become commonly referred to as loot boxes, we really think about 4 key vectors: value, fairness, choice, and fun. We want to feel like we got a good deal. We've got some live services businesses that are microtransaction fueled, that have some of the highest sentiment and highest engagement in the industry, so it's actually possible to do this right. No, it's not. Fuck off. Free-to-play economies have no place in a premium purchased game. And I've provided my arguments for that so many times I'm not even going to bother at this point. Just go watch the old Jimquisition episodes. I do like how he calls them microtransaction fueled games though. That's a term I often say. as a pejorative. We want to talk to a lot of regulators around the world. There's no sleight of hand here. If it's ultimately found that any form of monetization is inappropriate, we'll do something different. Many territories and many regulators have tested it and found it to be completely fine, in the same way that collecting baseball cards or KISS cards is fine. So what we did last year ahead of, I think, anyone in the industry is we went out and we started providing odds and being very transparent about the chances that you're going to get whatever it might be in any one of these packs. We're going to continue to do that because our objective was never to be opaque. Right, few things there. First of all, he's talking bollocks when he says that if it's found any form of monetization is inappropriate, they'll do something different. We already saw what happened in Belgium. They said that loot boxes were inappropriate and EA refused to remove them, promising to see them in court. Now, they eventually changed tact on that, but only under duress. They were prepared to fight tooth and nail on this. Second of all, he's talking about the thrill of opening a pack of KISS trading cards. Now, no company trying not to look like a sellout should compare themselves to KISS. Don't get me wrong, I like one or two of their songs. But when it comes to shameless money-making, I mean completely shameless money-making, KISS are the goddamn bloody experts. And I also call bullshit artist on this idea that EA started disclosing the odds of FIFA packs, like it was some altruistic move on their part, like it was a show of good faith. They did that as a response to the political and legal attention that loot boxes have started to get. Before there was a mass public outcry, they were fine with not showing the odds. And even when they started showing the odds, they didn't show the complete story. What does less than 1% chance mean, EA? What's the actual chance here? The only thing that isn't opaque here is the propaganda coming out of Andrew Wilson's mouth, because anyone with a brain can see through that. Anyway, the interview goes on and on like that, just a lot of apology, a lot of propaganda. At one point, Andrew Wilson tries to look like a good guy because he gave up a bonus to distribute amongst the workers, which on paper sounds nice, but the way EA's been going recently, he didn't deserve a bonus anyway, much less one so big it could actually be distributed among a bunch of workers. I'd like to thank viewer Christopher for bringing this article to my attention, and we'll leave by reminding you again of that statement Andrew Wilson said, that phrase, access over ownership. Something tells me that phrase is going to be very, very important going forward. It makes it very clear that the rights to own the content you buy are going away. And the trade-off may indeed be customer convenience. But in the hands of companies like EA, I question whether access over ownership is truly a good deal for us, the former owners of the things we buy.